Senator Ketter. Senator Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Most people would balk at the idea of harming animals for human pleasure. Most people would agree the deliberate and calculated infliction of pain, stress or terror on animals as sport or entertainment is barbaric. Since 2 horses died in the 2014 Melbourne Cup, I've realised how many people don't realise the cruelty involved in some sports. I did find it interesting when I was considering this issue that in 1991 there was actually a Senate Select Committee on Animal Welfare. One of its reports is entitled Equine Welfare in Competitive Events Other Than Racing. This report is very useful and still has considerable important information for us to consider. One of the reports of the inquiry looked at the welfare of horses used in sport. It found, and I quote, an inherent conflict between jumps racing and animal welfare, recommending that this cruel sport be phased out by 1994. 20 years later, however, only New South Wales has legislatively banned this activity. The committee report also found that the number of horse fatalities resulting from endurance riding is unacceptable. The report was critical of wrapping and other practices of hitting horses in equestrian events and concluded that such practices should be eliminated. That practice now results in disqualification from equestrian events. With so many examples of entertainment involving cruelty to animals, I have been left wondering if this committee should be revived. Terrible stress, pain and at times death is inflicted on horses in the name of sport and entertainment. Forcing animals to exceed the capacity of their body for our gratification is wrong. From 2013 to 2014, 125 horses have died on the track after the race. Or after the race. That is, on average, 1 horse dying on Australian racetracks every 3 days. Every 3 days, a horse dies on our racetracks, mostly from catastrophic limb injuries such as broken or fractured legs, backs, necks or pelvises. Horses also suffer from torn muscle, tendons and ligaments in these races. These figures do not include the large number of horses killed each year from racing-related injuries off the track, in training or when they are no longer worth money to their owners, and they do not include the fate of those 18,000 horses that leave the industry every year. Paul McGreevy, a professor of animal behaviour and animal welfare science at Sydney University, has put whipping horses under the spotlight. He wrote recently in The Conversation, and it was on the 29th of October 2014, Melbourne Cup Day punters appear blithely unaware that they are actually watching horses being whipped, and hard. Last year, more than 100,000 people attended the Melbourne Cup, with more than 3 million watching the race on TV in Australia alone. This would have to make whipping in horse racing the most public form of violence to animals in Australia today, but most people don't seem to notice it. To be fair, it was only when I saw high-speed images of whip impact that showed visible indentation of the skin in 83% of impacts I appreciated how likely it was that routine whipping of horses in racing causes pain. The professor's 2011 research revealed whipping makes no difference to the horse's race performance, but still there are no restrictions to the number of times a horse may be whipped in the last 100 metres, when the horse in fact is probably unable to exert its body any further. Professor McGreevy found the whip's padding failed to protect horses in 64% of strikes, that 70% of whip strikes are backhanded, so are not counted in the allowable limit of strikes, and that 75% of whip strikes were flank strikes, the side of the horse's sensitive abdomen, and illegal in more than 40 countries, including Australia. How ironic that the winning jockey of the Melbourne Cup is presented with a golden whip. Surely it is time to get rid of the golden whip and all whips in racing. Sports journalist Patrick Smith recently wrote, "If whips don't cause pain, there would be no use to them." Professor McGreevy has also stated in the conversation, representatives from the racing industry will doubtless say horses have thick skin and are therefore immune to the pain from whip impacts, but there is actually no evidence of such pain resistance in horses. Indeed, horses can feel a fly on their skin such that it triggers a characteristic shake called the panniculus reflex. 90% of race and event horses hemorrhage into their lungs, or 50 to 60% bleed into their windpipes. This has been well documented in many papers, including various scientific journals, and recently I read about it in the Journal of Applied Physiology. In reading on this issue, I was disturbed to find that the stress failure or bursting of horses' lung capillaries occurs in essentially all horses in training, and so is considered a normal occurrence in such sports. The physical ailments horses are forced to endure because of the activities humans force them into are extensive. Stabled racing horses are fed concentrated high protein, often a few times a day, to maximise performance. This leads to ulcerated stomachs in stabled horses. Not surprisingly, horses evolved to continuously graze grasses, hay and other fibrous food. 86% of race horses suffer ulcerated stomachs, and many suffer deep bleeding, ulcers within 8 weeks of starting race preparation. Most horses suffer inflammatory respiratory diseases, which is second only to lameness as the most common injury to horses. A lack of fresh air plus exposure to dust, allergens and endotoxins from bedding, feed and stable material have been identified as causes. Laminitis, a form of lameness, is caused by overstressing a good leg during recovery from an injured opposite limb, or by accumulated toxins from excessive carbohydrates or nitrates or hard surfaces. Dorothy Ainsworth, a veterinary research clinician and professor of large animal medicine at Cornell University, stated, this was in 2006, "It is becoming apparent that racing and strenuous exercise, the actual substance of being a racehorse, is exactly what is putting these horses at risk." The 1991 Senate inquiry also found practices in rodeos of concern. It found goads and other similar instruments were humane and cruel and shouldn't be used in the training or handling of rodeo stock. I do congratulate all the senators who are involved in that inquiry. I think much of their work stands the test of time and it remains very useful, particularly considering the large number of rodeos that operate in Australia. Professor McGreevy has alerted us to the animal cruelty involved in racing. Taunting, brutalising, mistreating animals is not entertainment. 20 years ago, the former senators in this place investigated animal welfare. I hope we can make our contribution to ending cruelty in the name of entertainment. Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President.